to introduce our key speaker, Klaus Kleinfeld. We invited him to help us understand the dynamics of the industry and a bit of the history by using his wealth of knowledge and experience. Klaus is a founder, international manager, investor, and advisor. He's the chairman and CEO of Consolidation Acquisition Corp, a NYSE listed SPAC. Klaus has had a 20-year history with Siemens. He became the CEO of Siemens AG in early 2005 and has successfully led the company through a substantial transformation. With that, I'd like to welcome and invite Klaus.
Fantastic. Okay, very good. My pleasure to be with you today.
Thank you. So, right off the cuff, there's quite a few world events happening at the moment.
Right. You timed it well.
Right. Literally, we were talking a couple of weeks ago and none of this was happening, right? And of course, there are political ramifications, humanitarian ramifications, but there are also, honestly, supply chain ramifications, right? Do you have any comments on kind of what's going on? And it seems like an already stressed system is getting stressed even more.
Yeah, and it's getting stressed, and kind of dormant dimensions are getting back into the game. We had already through COVID a stressed supply chain. And now, geopolitical considerations and national security concerns have come back on. Things that I think many of us, including myself, who has been born to refugees from East Germany, brought up in the West, and one of my luckiest moments was when I saw the reunification and the wall coming down, and have a lot of friends also over in the East, And I would have thought that this West and East thing is over forever, frankly, and now we're back in that. So we are back in new realities, I agree.
So, even with tragic events, right, there are opportunities and there are things that are kind of opening up. As the economy is opening up, even just, for example, due to COVID, what do you think are kind of the biggest opportunities or challenges that folks are going to have to get over in the manufacturing sector?
I think the biggest issue is what do you choose as a work model for the future? Because in a way, I don't think COVID has brought many new things in, but it has accelerated many of the aspects that have been dormant there. What we've seen in the whole aspect of online versus physical supplies, and also in the way we work, virtual versus physical. I do believe there's not one answer. I think sometimes these discussions are a little bit too simple because it depends on what industry you're in. Some the banks and the financial institutions have all talked about their apprenticeship model, where they want the new crop to look over the backs of the seniors, and I think that is an important point, And then if you go into the manufacturing industry, we all seem to not remember that in most manufacturing environments, they have been plowing through no matter what COVID was, and have been producing, have been having shifts, And then if you look at the white collar side, I think it's much easier and probably has a productivity advantage to allow more flexibility. I think that's one of the things that we have to figure out, And that's also one of the aspects that people are not taking into account this much. There was, I would say, 15 years ago, a wonderful Fortune article about the question of competitive advantages. And frankly, for those who love to see remote work happening, in a way, they also have to understand that releases the boundaries of physical presence, and that means that the value of work is very different. You can see that suddenly the option of having a team completely sit outside of the US or outside of their normal territory, and for a long time or almost forever is real, So the competitive environment in the workspace is shifting, and that can be an opportunity, a big opportunity.
I agree. I'd say as a company that thankfully doesn't necessarily have a large capital footprint, right, we've been able to dramatically change our office space and things because simply, if you're developing software or non-tangible good, right, you can have a completely different working model, and it opens up the different types of people that you can even hire.
Yeah, exactly.
So shifting then gears a little bit, right? Additive has been an industry that's been around for 30 plus years, right? And there are clearly some folks who are having some great wins from a production standpoint, but the overwhelming majority of the industry is not in any production capacity whatsoever. I mean, you've seen a number of different technologies come up, rise and fall, and take shape. And what do you think, from your experience, could be potentially holding this industry back, or maybe ways that this industry could be learning from past folks?
First of all, I have been, from the early days on that I saw the capabilities of additive, been extremely interested in it. The reason for it is because that was the time most strongly when I was running Alcoa and splitting into Alcoa and Arconic. And the aerospace sector is a large and important sector, aerospace, defense, and space, a very, very important sector. And that's one of the fields where additive has really a very good chance of adding a lot of value. And the other one is healthcare. So if you want to meet people in your industry, that say, hey, welcome, let's talk, in those industries, they would all want to see you with open arms. The only problem is these are two industries that are highly regulated for the same reasons, it's safety reasons. So by definition, progress in these industries is small, but that's been one of the things where people, I think, are saying, my God, why have we not been progressing? But these two industries are the most attractive ones, but they are, unfortunately, because they are regulated, they are slow. The other thing I think that the industry is not seeing clearly enough, and partially because very often the players in the industry don't have an experience with other technologies, and there's this combination, or this competition with the existing manufacturing capabilities, and they very often, for a given product, they are cheaper and faster, and therefore it's hard to make a business case for additive, And the third aspect that I've seen again and again, and I think it's scary, is that the skill set of developers is lagging behind. Even if you talk to a developer and say, I want you to develop a new product or this and that, I think it's way too rare that they think of additive, designing something into additive and breaking the boundaries of how the dating parts, even doing mock-ups, in additive. So I think those are things where I would say, if we can look at that, see can the industry educate people more? Can that happen? Can we find combinations of different manufacturing technologies, where additive is just one element of it? I think this could accelerate it.
I think you bring up a good point, and we've actually talked about this a couple of times, right? The human aspect of this industry, right? Just having even been in this industry just for 5+ years, it's clear to me that the people in this industry are not changing. They're essentially playing musical chairs among each other, right? And without new blood to run the machines, design for the machines, etc., right? The machines themselves ultimately become useless, right? And it seems like that we're almost a decade behind from an education perspective in getting enough people here, because nearly every company that I've talked to is struggling right now to even hire the people necessary to run these machines. Of course, this type of a problem has existed in the past, right? With any new technology, it takes time for folks to learn how to use it, and disperse that knowledge. Do you know of any techniques or ways that has happened in the past to kind of jumpstart this, or is it just the slow growing university education process?
Yes and no. There's part of it, and there are things that I have seen in those type of highly disruptive things, So let's start with the simple things. I think that potentially a joint initiative, of the players in the advanced manufacturing side. The ecosystem. I'm talking about the ecosystem because in the end, the ecosystem wins or the ecosystem loses. So only after you've done that, you can then go, which company wins and loses, So, but what I would highly recommend is to get more into the universities and also do kind of probably qualification courses, for the existing developers, make them excited, pass out little goodies, that they can use certain tools for free at the beginning, So you basically want to, developers are typically people who have engineering degrees are excited by new things. So it's not difficult to excite them, but I would do more of that. And I know this is very expensive and most companies probably don't have enough means for it. So, if one could have a joint initiative, potentially even with the government. I remember I've been on the Obama Advanced Industry board, and additive manufacturing already there was a very important part. And I think we even created a center for additive manufacturing. So there are resources, and I think one can pull those off. And the other thing is, when you have something, and that's a more problematic one, when you have something as dramatic as change as this, the issue is, my old saying says every great idea goes through 3 stages. In the first, everybody laughs about it. In the second, everybody says it's not doable. And the third, everybody claims that they have had the idea, So it's a bit of the curse of something as dramatic as this, And I would also say, very often I've seen a mistake being made in general by very strongly technically led industries, that they put the technology too much in the foreground and don't understand the application, so that they don't understand, so what is it that it creates as customer value. And in the end, if it doesn't have enough customer value, against the existing competition, then you lose, And I have seen in conversations with some of the players in this industry that they very rarely had a deep understanding of the application, and that is very limiting, very, very limiting. And you can reach this by, just aligning yourself with some people who have worked in the industries before, who have a deep network, some people who have retired, and it's actually not that expensive, And I love this quote, which is actually, I think I forgot who it is from, and it's from basically unweirding the weird. I remember the origin of, and that's a good kind of indicator, the origin of Uber. The 2 guys, Kalanick and his friend, standing there in Paris in the rain and trying to flag a taxi down, and couldn't get a taxi, and got drenched, and then said, what the hell is that? In a world of today, we're standing here instead of having an app, and this is how Uber was born, and the idea of looking at what we have gotten used to, but what is really not something that we should get used to. And that is particularly in the advanced manufacturing side, so often the case,
No, I 100% agree. 100% agree. It's gonna take it coming from all angles, and I do like this concept of an industry body or a community, if you will, and basically lowering the bar to entry, right? That makes a heck of a lot of sense. So in the last few minutes, kind of switching gears once more, a kind of very more of a financial topic or investor topic, when clearly SPACs had a rise over the last year and have had mixed results over the last year, right? It's a new capitalization strategy, right? It's clearly different, slightly different to the IPO model. What's your opinion of the good, the bad, and the ugly of this financing strategy?
Disclosure, I raised this SPAC together with 2 of my good friends, and last year, and we are currently looking for a partner. And frankly, I would not have done, if you would have asked me about, let's say, 10 years ago, where I was approached, to doing a SPAC, and I looked at that the last time, I would have said, never in my wildest dreams would I ever do that. But the interesting thing, like it is so often in the US, the financial instrument is getting developed, and it has become a really, really cool instrument. I think it's going to stay, and I think you have more voices now than ever that talk about the advantages of the SPAC. And in the end, it's not that complicated. It's just another way of doing an IPO, But this other way comes with some niceties. Number one, it's faster. Number two, if you choose the right partner, because you can actually increase your network. I mean, you can basically, look at, and interestingly, by the way, we just saw an analysis this week by looking at purely financial specs to operator-led specs to celebrity-led specs, and it's clear the operator-led specs have outperformed all the others, and not a surprise to me, because in the end, with an operator-led, you get additional brains, hands, networks, So, but with the wrong, this also goes the other way, if with the wrong partner, who basically wants to just get the IPO done and then jumps into the bushes and disappears, that is usually not a recipe for longer term success. And the other big thing for a nascent industry is that in a spec, you are allowed to use forward-looking numbers. So you can talk in the IPO process, you can talk about the future, and your valuation is also more focused on that. At the same time, the market has seen something really good happening from, let's say, last year to this year. The valuations have become much more realistic, much more tied to what a normal investor would look at, like based on cash flow, and not just based on the wildest dreams from 27 to 35 or whatever, with overinflated numbers. And that's also a good thing, because the worst is you go out and you think you had a big success with the IPO, then the market realizes your valuation is too high, and then the stock comes down. From that moment on, you have many, many years of hard work, that you now have to fight an uphill battle. So it's much better to go out in the market because you're also not selling, you're not selling down on the equity. Go out into the market with a realistic valuation, and then have the market form an opinion and say, this is really cool, I want to be in it.
And in the absence of immediate questions, maybe I'll ask one question that's been burning on my own head. Clearly the industry has been consolidating as well over the last 2 years. There've been major M&A activity. What areas excite you on that side of things? Like, do you think the industry is going to continue to consolidate? And where do you think is the interesting stuff?
Yeah, I think the industry will consolidate like it is normal in an industry at this early stage, and it's going to help the industry, in my view, done reasonably well. So. By the way, that also raises very often the question, who are the consolidators? And interestingly, it is not the ones who have the best technology, but it's the ones who have the most money, and that's when, by the way, to link it to the previous discussion, that's often when the point comes in, why is it better to be a public company than to be a private company? Because once you are a public company, you obviously have the opportunity to use the toolbox that public companies have in terms of raising money. So, what excites me? The thing that I'm very excited by is the degrees of freedom that advanced manufacturing, some of the advanced manufacturing capabilities have. So I've seen some machines that allow even the use of multiple materials in one piece, and freely using that. Frankly, if you look at which engineer is capable of handling that level of freedom, I think that is the biggest problem. If you have a piece, let's say you do a piece in metal, and you do a piece for space, so where features like weight as well as heat play a major role, this could create enormous value if you can shape the piece with different types while you build it up with different types of metal structure and metal alloys in one piece, and get the different capabilities that you need at that position. I think there is no engineer these days who can do it. Because they are already overwhelmed with transferring it into a 3D printed piece. And then if you tell them that's the other level of freedom, they freak out. So I'd love to see more of that. Because for this, people would pay quite a lot. And the other thing that I would see, which I raised before, and I can't talk about it in too much detail. I invested relatively strongly into advanced manufacturing at Alcoa, and we had, because Alcoa has every technology, every manufacturing technology in their skill sets, and the most interesting pieces I have seen that we've made with Advance were some very large pieces that were done with a combination of different manufacturing technologies. So giving them not just the advantage of being printed, but also giving them the advantage of strength capabilities and weight capabilities, that you would only be able to reach through the combination of different manufacturing technologies. And frankly, I mean, the resonance from the customers was insane. And our manufacturing skills, I think, were at that point in time not at the level that we could have done it at scale, but this is only a question of time, And then the other thing is on the prototyping side. I mean, we've done some prototyping with large pieces. I'm talking really large pieces where we then turned the prototype into a usable prototype, and through multiple steps, and that's something where the customers just are freaking out, and they are very much paying for this, So those are the things that excite me. I could go on. There's a couple of other things that excite me when it comes to metals powder. I get very excited because it would also help. It would also help the industry. It would help the regulator to have an easier time of basically signing off on certain parts being made in print.
So we're starting to get some questions in.
Yeah, sure.
This one's from David. So, I mean, he asks, what's the greatest bottleneck for AM adoption? Is it the technology? Is it the education? Is it the viable business cases? It seems that you're at least saying for the aerospace and the medical spaces, it's regulation. But for the other ones, maybe, what do you think is the greatest bottleneck?
Well, it's regulation as well as capabilities of developers. Basically, I mean, I would love the discussion when somebody says I design a new piece. In fact, the real cool thing is not I design a new piece. The moment somebody says I want this to be printed, that's already when it has gone wrong. You want to talk about the whole structure so that you have an opportunity to use one of the advantages that Advanced has, that you can consolidate, and the moment you can consolidate, let's say 10, 15, 20 pieces, get rid of certain things and basically shape off weight through saving on connectors, shave off weight, through making the structures much more different along the pieces. That's when the advantage comes in. I would love that conversation to happen more. For this to happen, you really do need an education process on the developer so that the developer goes back, understanding ideally what the problem of the customer is. And the aerospace is relatively simple. I mean, it's heat, weight, strength, those are the dimensions that, depending on where this piece sits, those are the dimensions. So it's relatively clear to see what is this for this piece, And then for the developer to go back and say, hey, you told me to do this, but I have a better idea. I have the idea of X, When you can do this as a supplier, you are truly delivering customer value, So I wish there were more people there in the development side, who would take that, and also more in the leadership side who would allow them to do it.
Well, I think that's a pretty good question. I segue into the next question, which is, what barriers do you think, like the C-suite face, that prevent them from adopting additive?
Yeah, without being too overly.
I was going to say vision might be one of them.
Without being too overly critical here, one of the things that always puzzled me when I looked at the backgrounds of the C-suite in the US compared to the background of the C-suite elsewhere, you interestingly don't have that many people who have a technological background. I mean, you see much more often people coming from the financial side or even the legal side. And I think even for those that have a technical background, I mean, it might not be the easiest to get excited over this, and they might say it's too early, I'm not getting into it, But I think one of the issues also is with the industry to explain to be out there, be upfront and say, guys, I mean, this is the value that we can create. But you can only do that if you understand what value is there for the customer. what value is there for, as long as the industry starts talking about this are our skills, we can print this faster, and doesn't translate that into what does that mean for this industry, you'll have a hard time. You have to find somebody, either a customer or do the task yourself, and also talk more about the success stories. There are gazillions of success stories here, even if it's just been a showcase. I would not be shy. I mean, just check. I mean, if you even go into an engineering school and say how many people you ask in a room, how many people have seen, use cases, industrial use cases, not just experimental little prints, industrial use cases of advanced manufacturing. How many are this?
Yeah. So we'll ask one more question and then wrap it up. So it seems like you're most excited about metals technologies, right, in the aerospace and medical sector.
Well,
maybe I'm already wrong.
Given that that's my experience background in advance, yes, but to get to some of this, you would also need polymers and plastic, So I'm seeing a large field on that, and two different use cases, and for medical, you would also have actually for both sides, you would have use cases with different materials, and I love material combinations also.
Okay, well, just to keep things moving along, that's all we have time for at the moment. Kind of a round of applause for Klaus, and thank you for your time.
My
much
pleasure.
appreciated.